Welcome to the Rebel Health Coach Podcast with Tom Underwood. Armed with truth and knowledge, your journey to a healthy lifestyle can be obtained. Preventative wellness, quality nourishment, and daily fitness routines dramatically improve your outlook on life as a whole. And you'll find the support and info you need to accomplish a healthier lifestyle here. Together, we can empower each other along our journey to an amazing you.
Today on the Rebel Health Coach podcast, I welcome Dr. Daniel Pompa. Dr. Daniel Pompa is a global health leader on a mission to educate practitioners and the public on the origins of inflammation-driven disease. Although trained as a chiropractor, his authority is rooted in his own battle, having overcome neurotoxic illness and heavy metal poisoning using unique cellular detoxification strategies. For the past 2 decades, Dr. Pompa has been studying, practicing, and teaching true cellular detox around the world. A leader in the field of functional medicine, Dr. Pompa's work can be found at drpompa.com and his weekly Cellular Healing TV podcast, which are viewed worldwide by thousands. Dr. Pompa also has a book out called The Cellular Healing Diet, Heal the Cell, Get Well, Lose Weight, and Feel Great. Man, I'm so blessed to have you on here today.
Blessed to be here, always.
I went to the HCF conference.
Yeah.
When you spoke about this autoimmune three-legged stool, I almost stood up out of my seat and said, hallelujah, somebody gets this.
That's awesome.
You know, but before we start into the three-legged stool and autoimmune, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? I know you're a graduate of Life University right here in my backyard. And you also went to the University of Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I did.
You graduated in 80 or 95 from Life University, second in your class?
Yes, that's all true.
Okay. So what got you into, from being a doctor, chiropractor, into this realm of functional medicine?
Yeah, I didn't choose it. It chose me because I got really sick. I had a really successful chiropractic office and helping a lot of people. And, it was funny because, looking back, I kind of hit a place of incongruency. I was a little incongruent and I knew it because I started seeing more and more sick people and I started not seeing results. And I was getting really frustrated and, I didn't know where the answer lied, but I'm one of those people that just, I have to get results. I strive for it. And, I have to be congruent. And all of a sudden fatigue hit and I didn't know where it was coming from. I was doing a lot of training at the time. I thought I was overtraining and I diminished my training overload and I didn't get better. As a matter of fact, I was getting worse. Then I went to headaches. Then I went to insomnia, panic attacks, then bizarre things, right? I couldn't digest food. I became intolerant to everything, chemicals, food. I just, like I said, hormonally, I was an absolute mess. I couldn't adapt to any stress, not even loud noises. I couldn't even watch movies because just the excitement would send me into this adrenal overflow. My hair started thinning, so I knew my thyroid wasn't right, and I was addressing all of that like most people did. I was addressing the adrenals, but even though my energy would get a little bit better, then I wouldn't sleep. And, I tried doing all of these things that I think most people do. And by the way, my blood work looked normal. That was frustrating as well. But it was years later. I met a very bright endocrinologist, and I was still hunting these thyroid and adrenal issues that I had going on. And he said, Dan, I think you have mercury poisoning. And I was like, I thought so too. A year or so ago, I did a blood test because I found Mad Hatter's disease online. Said, man, I have every one of these symptoms. And if you know what Mad Hatter's is, they were using mercury to make felt hats, and they became poisoned, and they were known mad as a hatter. That was me. But that was acute mercury poisoning. He said, a blood test would only show up if you had acute mercury poisoning, like Mad Hatter's, but I think you have chronic. And so he said, do this test. It was a challenge a challenge test to see if the mercury was in my tissues, and sure enough, it showed up. So I asked the logical question, "Where do you think I got it from?" He said, "Do you have any dental work done around the time all this happened?" And I said, "I may have, because I had this 2 fillings removed and some gold put in. I still had about 6 amalgams in, which, by the way, contained 50% mercury. And lo and behold, I called my good friend who did that work, and it was just days after that my symptoms actually started. So I just never correlated it. So therein lied my future. I started researching on how to get the rest of these things out safely, and then I researched how to get it out of my brain, because that's where it was. And in that, I got myself well. And then, ironically enough, I would have to say, one of my, soon after patients was, we had a death in our family, a tragic death. And we ended up inheriting 2 children, 7 years old at the time, boy and a girl. They're twins. They were my wife's cousins, and their parents tragically died. And he was on the autism spectrum, and I was trying to help his mother out with that, and too much chaos in the life to help. But he was vaccine damaged. Anyways, he came into our life on the spectrum, Asperger's, sensory integration. And I applied what I learned with myself to him. And so that kind of led me into being able to lecture about this stuff and teaching what I teach today. And that's the cellular detox, cellular healing, and what you described, that 3-legged stool of really an analogy of why people are getting sick. And therein lies the answer to the solution.
I love the analogy of the 3-legged stool because it's simple, and it pretty much relates to all disease and even general weight loss.
It does.
And a lot of physicians today in Western medicine don't get this, nor do they go find the root causes of these symptoms or diseases.
Well, Tom, you have 2 things happening here, right? You have the allopathic side of things that they don't care to get it. They're stuck in a paradigm. So I'm not being critical. It is what it is. They're stuck in a paradigm of, here's symptoms, here's medications, and there's a time and a place for that, but that's not addressing the chronic disease nor the cause, right? Then you have the alternative side, right? And they're really doing the same thing, but with supplements and other pills. They're really not understanding why people are getting sick. They're not addressing it, and they're not going far enough upstream to really make a difference, at least a lasting difference.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm just finishing up my schooling for functional medicine. And that's another thing that, was in a room full of people, of like-minded people, like at that conference, it just gave me chills, because all these people are out in that room to make a difference.
Yeah.
And it almost gave me tears. It was like God probably put me in that place.
Yeah.
And, today in our society, autoimmune disease or activation rarely comes out of the middle of nowhere. It's a build up to it.
Yeah. Well, look, there's so many subjects here. Number one, we better tell them what the heck the 3-legged stool is. But, I'll say this on autoimmune, and we'll move into that, because, most of it's underdiagnosed. The testing is in the Stone Ages. So you've had autoimmune for 10, 20, even 30 years before you get a diagnosis. Most people have it and don't know it. All the unexplainable symptoms, hormone problems. I can go down a list. It's autoimmune, meaning your body's attacking itself, driving cellular inflammation, and thereby a host of symptoms that you go, I don't get it. I'm eating better. I'm doing this. I'm doing it. And yet I still don't feel well. It's most likely autoimmune. Now, the 3-legged stool is just a great analogy of what's going on, the cause of it. And again, I said, therein lies the solution. So if you think of a 3-legged stool, what is the analogy? You have 3 legs that have to be there for the stool to hold up. Well, thereby there's 3 things that have to be going on for the autoimmune, or like you said, it goes beyond autoimmune, really for any condition today, chronic condition. So we have, number one, DNA. Certain genes that get triggered or turned on. Now, the old paradigm that most people listening to, your doctors still believe in, oh, you just have a thyroid condition because your mother had it. Well, that dogma is so scientifically old and rejected, and yet people still get it. They still believe in it, I should say.
Right.
But it is not that simple. Genes are turned on. We all have genes of our, susceptibility and weaknesses. However, there are stressors that turn them on. We get that today. So yes, you may have a thyroid condition, you may have diabetes, you may have been diagnosed with an autoimmune or some gut condition. That gene was triggered. So you will not feel better until you understand that we have the ability and we can turn that expression of gene off. So that therein lies a lot of science that people are not applying today, even the alternative, definitely not the allopathic side, that we know how to turn these genes off. And a lot of my cellular healing work in my 5 R's applies to turning off those genes. Now, the other leg, so that's one leg of the stool. We have to address that cause. The another leg of this three-legged stool is the stressors that turned it on. If we don't remove them, then we're not going to be able to turn those genes off long term, whether it's physical stress, chemical, or emotional. We have to deal with those causes of that gene being turned on. In my True Cellular Detox, that's really what, that area that we address. Okay, and this is the last leg. We know now more about what's called the microbiome, meaning that we have more bacteria than even cells in our body. And we now know that these bacteria play into our immune system, how our brain works. And all these things, we had no idea of this relationship between our cells and our bacteria. Well, we know that when this gets disrupted, again, certain genes are turned on. Now it backs up detox pathways. So we must address this epidemic of the onslaught of this bacteria problem. And we have people with leaky gut. Some of your listeners may have heard of that, but it's, a condition where things are leaking across the gut because it's so inflamed and toxic. We have all of these gut issues today that are part of this three-legged stool of why we're seeing an explosion of chronic disease. So the answer is when we address the microbiome correctly, and we have a unique way of doing that, when we address the stressors correctly, and I teach a unique way of cellular detox, and then when we address the DNA, putting it all together, therein lies an answer the world needs, but yet so few are doing this. And that's why you're right. God sent you to my conference to be another mouthpiece on saying, listen, this works. We need more people doing it.
Right. You talk about the perfect storm under stressors. And I love that analogy also. That was actually a movie by George Clooney, but
yeah.
Can you go into this perfect storm of the stressors a little bit?
When you talk to as many sick and challenged people as I do almost every day, they all tell a certain story about how this perfect storm came together. And the analogy of the movie is great because, in the movie, you had 3 weather fronts come together. If it was 2, it's a bad storm, but it's not a catastrophic perfect storm. When it's 3, then it's a catastrophic storm, 1 in 100 years. And that's what the perfect storm is. Well, so true with this because you have 3 stressors that come together. And when you have that, we know that it's powerful enough to turn on a lot of bad genes, right? Think of that three-legged stool again. Typically, you can have 2 chemical stressors that you bioaccumulated, these chemicals from the time of birth, from your mother in utero, whether it's lead, mercury, whatever it is. And then in life, you start accumulating other chemical stressors. Then you add an emotional stressor to that. And that could be that third storm that comes in and boom, triggers the gene. And now catastrophe. Now you have the symptoms that start. Now you have autoimmune that's triggered, right? So any form, it could be physical, a stressor. Some people say it was after this car accident. I got a whiplash that all my fibromyalgia began. Well, look, that in itself didn't cause it. It was one more storm to these other chemical stressors that you already had accumulating in your body. Or it could be the last chemical. I just have a client after this, it was a moldy exposure that ended up triggering all of these crazy symptoms. But I promise you, I'll find that there was other stressors going on. And that moldy, she literally went into an office started a new job in 2014. I'm looking down at the paper, and went into a moldy environment, and boom, all these symptoms started. That was the perfect storm, because other people were in that moldy environment. Now they're just waiting for their next trigger and their next storm to show up. But that's what happens. That's what we see, and that's why people are getting sick.
On the genetic leg, what are some of the toxins that we are exposed to on a daily basis?
Well, you have your big boys that I call them, right? You have your heavy metals, some of these infections like Lyme, or I mentioned mold. They're big, big toxins that are very, very nasty and can really cause the bucket to overflow, if you will. I like to refer to it as the stress bucket, right? Or the toxic bucket. It starts filling in utero and from womb to the tomb. And genetically, some of us have bigger buckets, some of us have smaller buckets, but it starts filling with the exposures of any type of stress. Again, physical, chemical, or emotional, and one day it overflows, right? So, and that's when the gene gets triggered, and that's that perfect storm that fills that bucket very rapidly. But we look at things like heavy metals. They're so nasty, they can trigger genes very easily. When you consider we grew up in the lead generation, the mercury generation, the number one source of lead is mom in utero. When women are pregnant, the lead, most of it's stored in the bone, and out it comes during pregnancy. It's normal to lose bone during pregnancy, and the lead comes out and it ends up in the baby in utero. Well, there's a study called the DRESS study that showed the number of fillings, mom, in your mouth. Those are those silver amalgam fillings that I said had 50% mercury in that got me sick. The number of fillings in your mouth, according to the study, is proportional to how much we find in the baby's brain. So you can see the accumulation starts. You have these big toxins, and then we start adding other toxins to it. BPA from plastics. It's unavoidable. It's in everything. It has the ability also to turn genes on and off. There was a study, it was from the Duke University, and they took two groups of identical twin mice. So exact same DNA, right? Put them in the exact same environments and fed them the exact same food. Same everything. Except the one group then, they exposed to BPA, a toxin that we're talking about, and it turned on, it triggered a gene called the agouti gene, which made the mice obese. It gave them some thyroid conditions, some heart disease, some other symptoms, et cetera. Their fur turned yellow and dry. And the unique thing about the study is the next generation of mice was born with that gene turned on. So they became little teenage mice, and of course they became obese with thyroid conditions, you name it. So, we see that today, right? So the gene was turned on. Now, here's the best part of the study is they turned the gene off. So they were able to turn that off and make thin mice again. I think there's the gap between science and the treatment worlds. We know these genes are getting turned off by some of these chemicals, or turned on, I should say, but we also know how to turn them off. So, an exposure of some of these big toxins leads us to start accumulating these other toxins, and then those other toxins can have an effect on our genome. So we're all exposed. It's a matter of how big your bucket is and what susceptible genes you have.
And now a word from our sponsor. We'll be back in a minute.
We all know that eating healthy is a part of becoming a better person. But if you're finding the organic and non-toxic products too expensive or hard to find, then ThriveMarket.com, the healthy online shopping club, is your solution. Like the Costco meets Whole Foods for everything healthy online, you'll get the best organic and non-GMO brands up to 50% off retail prices, shipped nationally to your door for free within 2 to 3 days. When you become a member, ThriveMarket.com will donate a free membership to a low-income family, teacher, or veteran, so we can all thrive together. You never have to pay full price for healthy food again. Go to ThriveMarket.com/TheRebelHealthCoach to get your free jar of coconut oil and 15% off your first order. This offer is valued at $18 and available for our listeners only on this special link. So here it is again, thrivemarket.com/The Rebel Health Coach.
How do we turn all this off and have 3 solid legs?
Well, okay, so we want to address each leg of the stool, right? So we can kind of discuss some of the things we do under each leg, because if this is the cause, the solution, then we have to address all of them. The DNA part.
Right.
When you look at the research on how to turn these genes off, it's, there a lot of things come into play. Because it gets complicated, I developed something called my 5 R's of cellular healing. I could say my 5 R's of how to turn genes off, but no one would understand that. But the 5 R's just simply is a roadmap to do so. So number one, remove the source. Meaning, if you still have silver fillings in your mouth, you're going to have trouble turning genes off. You got to remove the sources. If you live in a moldy home, you're going to have trouble turning genes off. We have to look at the sources and remove them. R number 2 is regenerating the cell membrane. If you look at Bruce Lipton's work and others, the membrane of every cell is, of course, a big part of how the cell even detoxes, moving good things in and bad things out. But it also is a big part of how we turn genes on and off. So if we don't fix that cell membrane, regenerate, we can never turn these genes off. So the science is very clear. R number 3 is restoring the cell energy, which again, big player in detoxing the cell, but also a big player in turning off these bad genes. You have to restore the cellular energy, and we have many methods to do that. 4 is reducing the inflammation of the cell, which seems the obvious. But again, we can do that through diet, certain supplementations, redox molecules. But when we reduce the inflammation, now we can turn the gene off. A lot of studies there. And then R number 5 is reestablishing methylation. And methylation is a big issue today. Many people lack these things called methyl groups. By the way, it protects your DNA. And in that mouse study that I talked about, they actually gave the mice methylation, these methyl groups, to turn off the DNA. So, what depletes us of these things? Toxins, stressors. So many people are depleted. And then it allows bad genes to get turned on. But reestablishing those pathways is another strategy to turning off the bad genes. So that's one leg of the stool. The second leg is removing the stressors. The bioaccumulation of these toxins is key. Now, we can have a whole discussion here, so I don't want to get too far down this road, but most people, I think, would understand that toxins are why they don't feel well. Detox is very in vogue right now. However, the 10-day cleanse, the chlorella, the cilantro, all these things we see in our doctor's offices or health food stores, Whole Foods, they are not where the problem is. They're not addressing detox in the right place. The colon cleanse, it may be helpful, but the problem is what's happening in the cell. Real detox has to go to the cell. So I call it true cellular detox because that's the issue here. If we don't detox the cell, if we don't get the cell doing what it really does, that's not real detox. So I have no problem with a liver cleanse or a colon cleanse or whatever it is, but it's not real detox unless you get the cell doing what it should be doing. So true detox has to be at the cellular level. And that's the center leg of the stool. So when we address that correctly at the cell, now we can start loosening these, removing these stressors, and of course the emotional stuff, trapped emotions is a big deal. And, when you remove toxins, believe it or not, you're even removing trapped emotions, but that's another level that, people oftentimes have to deal with. The chiropractors are relieving physical stress off the nerve system. That's a big deal because we want to remove physical, chemical, and emotional to turn those genes off. Okay, so that's the leg of the stool. And then the other leg, the final leg, is the microbiome. And I know it sounds, people are going to go, oh yeah, I'm taking a probiotic, so I'm good on that leg. Well, Tom, I wish it were so simple. Matter of fact, I have bad news for most of your listeners. That probiotic you've been taking for so long, probably making you worse. So it's not what you think. It's creating what we call colonies where you're just forcing one bacteria in, or 7 or 5, whatever it is, when there's thousands, really. So how do we fix this? My ancient healing strategies is really the way. And that's just briefly. We use different diets, of course, but fasting, intermittent fasting, and then something I've called diet variation, feast famine cycles. So we're creating stressors on the microbiome and these bacteria. And that's the real way to fix the gut. So again, that's probably a whole nother podcast of ancient healing strategies, and autoimmune, but we can go down that road if you want.
Well, I mean, the microbiome, people don't understand. I mean, I'm a firm believer of disease. All disease begins in the gut. I think people don't get that what they put in their gut and how they take care of their gut matters so much. I mean, it matters depression, anxiety, sleep. It has so much to do with our brain activity, and people miss that point.
There's something called a Shigame pathway, and the pathway is basically how your gut, your stomach, your gut takes bacteria, and it makes certain amino acids that you need to make certain neurotransmitters for your brain to work normal and for you to feel normal, meaning serotonin, right? We know that the lack of serotonin, your brain needs serotonin so you feel happy. Dopamine's another one, right? So we know these brain chemicals. And of course, medicine today is, just giving people these chemicals and creating more imbalance, right? But really, it's this offset of bacteria that we don't have enough of, or that are being killed by certain toxins that are really creating this problem. And so instead of throwing more medications at kids and people, antidepressants, we need to be understanding. The science is clear that it's the imbalance of these bacteria that is creating this brain problem. And then you spoke about the immune system. Let me give you one example of these bacteria and how critical they are to a normal functioning immune system that's not attacking itself, aka autoimmune. So there's a bacteria called Bacteroides fragilis. You don't have to remember that, but here's the unique thing about this particular bacteria, and there's many. Imagine that. We keep discovering more and more. This bacteria is needed for you to make a white blood cell called a T regulatory cell. Now, these cells tell your immune system that everything's okay to back off. So you can imagine if you didn't have enough of these T regulatory cells, that you would end up with food intolerances, allergies, and worse yet, autoimmune. So we know now that it's the lack of this bacteria, Bacteroides fragilis, that really is the problem. When we don't have enough of this, we don't make enough T regulatory cells, and then we have this autoimmune and this, all these bad things happen. So it's not about giving a medication over here. It's about understanding how do we fix this bacteria. And by the way, you can't replace this bacteria from a pill. It's not so simple, right? Again, this is where these ancient healing strategies come in. That's the key.
And I've even heard that they are now taking fecal matter and implanting it, good fecal matter, and implanting into people's guts that are so far gone that they need this.
Well, it's true in this country. The FDA will not allow a fecal microbial transplant for autoimmune. Other countries are doing it with amazing success. However, here you're only allowed to do a fecal microbial transplant for C. diff, which it saves people's lives. And yet, even still, very few hospitals are still even doing that. They're just throwing more antibiotics at C. diff and wondering why people get more sick and end up completely with autoimmune. But other countries are using fecal microbial transplant for autoimmune, and it's remarkable when you replace these bacteria. We're working with some scientists right now developing, some different bacteria pills, from human bacteria. So, and it's a completely different thing. Problem is the FDA and, a lot of issues. Yeah.
So for this particular bacteria, fermented foods?
Yeah, well, for this particular bacteria, fermented foods aren't a good source. I would say more like prebiotics, meaning fiber, would be a better source. Again, I want to lean on our number one, removing the sources. The chemical glyphosate that's being sprayed on our entire food supply.
Yeah, that's a biggie.
Yeah, it crushes Bacteroides fragilis and others, right? I mean, creates leaky gut, opens up something called tight junctions, which allow your undigested proteins to flow into your bloodstream, triggering, an immune reaction. So getting rid of these chemicals and toxins, again, that's the other leg of the stool, right? All these legs of the stool work together. But yeah, I mean, some of these prebiotics and fibers can be a big player. I love fermented food. Fermented foods do bring in a host of unique bacteria in the trillions. And I think you do get a much greater colony of good bacteria from fermented foods, plus the fiber, plus things we haven't discovered yet, than you would from a pill. And I'm not against all probiotics. I think you can rotate and move to try different ones, but again, without doing these other things, it's useless. And if you've been on a probiotic for months after months, same one, please change, stop, get rid of it.
Keto adaptation. This is you're a big ketogenic or into the keto adaptation part. I read a little bit about that, and I've had Jimmy Moore on my show.
Love Jimmy.
Yeah, he's an amazing man. And another one of those that's doing the work that needs to be done to get the word out. But does keto adaptation help with this?
It does. I'm not a believer, probably where Jimmy and I disagree, and I love Jimmy, so I'm not disrespecting at all. But I'm not a believer in just staying in ketosis. Right. I think issues can occur with chronic low insulin for a long time. The body can think it's starving. I mean, we can talk a lot about that. But moving in and out of ketotic states, I think, is really emulating ancient cultures. Ketosis is part of my ancient healing strategy on how we fix a gut and a microbiome. But we do move people in and out of the state because the moving in and out creates an adaptation. It changes. It forces the microbiome to change. I think one of the things that we see today is people just stay on the same diet. I think that's a mistake. Ancient cultures were always forced to change their diet, whether it was environmental changes, lack of food, seasonal changes, multiple reasons. But today we don't. And I think it's a microbiome mistake. When we force these changes, we force the microbiome to change. And that's good because that adaptation will create different colonies. It will create a successful, microbiome, meaning that more diversity in the microbiome. So moving in and out of ketotic states, but even there's studies that show that when you go into ketosis, and maybe we should redefine that a little bit for people, but it really changes your DNA. It changes your microorganisms in your gut, and it almost resets the DNA and the bacteria in your gut, almost like humans are meant to go through these times where they're forced into ketosis.
Okay. I was talking to him about this a little bit also, is that, just like if you're going to build muscle or even your daily workouts, if you don't change some things, you're not going to change the composition of your body.
Right. Absolutely. It's about adaptation. Yeah.
Right. And I don't believe in staying in a ketogenic diet for a long period of time. I mean, it's okay. I believe that cycling in and out, along with Dr. Fung and his theories on intermittent fasting, I believe that's a great, but I fast on, I have a tendency to fast from dinner, to about 11 o'clock in the morning or whenever I feel like breaking fast. But I mean, I think if you add all these together, but if you stay in ketosis a long period of time or stay on one diet a long period of time, your body's just going to adapt to that. I mean, let's face it, God gave us an amazing body. And if we provide the right tools, our body will heal itself. Mm-hmm. And one of your quotes I loved a lot is, if you do not fix the cell, you'll never make it well.
Right, exactly. You won't get well without fixing the cell.
So I think if we wrap all this together and we do a true detox, I mean, I see, like to your point about detoxes on the web, I mean, Facebook, everybody's doing a 12-day, everybody's doing a 3-day, but you're not getting to the true cellular level when you do those detoxes. So therefore, they're more of a cleanse and not a detox.
Right. Real detox has to go to the cell, and you won't get well unless you fix the cell. You're absolutely right. And, on the conversation about the diet, and it really is putting it all together. And when you address all the legs of the stool, it's what I call a multi-therapeutic approach. When you look at neurodegenerative diseases, whether it's dementia, Alzheimer's, even addressing weight loss resistance and hormone conditions, it really is a multi-therapeutic approach that works, right? We utilize ketosis. We utilize fasting, intermittent fasting, and this concept of, switching diets and varying it, which I call diet variation. We utilize that with true cellular detox, with the cellular healing work and changing the genome. Putting it all together, therein lies the magic, Tom.
Yeah, exactly. I can't wait to start using your true cellular detox for my practice once I finish up with my school, because I was just astounded by that. I got to talk to some people there, and I'm looking forward to finishing up my studies and getting on with it and using that to help my practice. And wrapping this up, because I know you're a busy, busy man, drpompa.com. You also have an awesome podcast every week called Cellular Healing TV. And a book that is in my rotation is the Cellular Healing Diet. Heal the cell, get well, lose weight, and feel great. I appreciate you taking the time to be on my show today. I know I'm a small fish in this large pond, and I am truly blessed that you were able to join me and take time out of your schedule.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I loved spreading the message. And it's it's Dr. Pompa. You don't spell doctor. Just Dr. Then my last name, POMPA.com.
Okay. I love what you're doing for God's nation and God's people. You just touched my heart that day, and I'm glad I was there. I have one question before I go, and I ask this of all my guests, is if you have had one album to select from and you had 30 or 40 minutes time alone, what album or artist would you listen to?
It depends on my mood. I grew up with Frank Sinatra, right? So the Italian family, Frank Sinatra was playing in my house all the time, right? So, it's just every word, comes to my mind. Every song comes to my mind, right? So when I'm just moving around my home, I love Sinatra on because that's what I grew up with. I also grew up because of my sisters. I had 3 older sisters, and Bruce Springsteen was like, that was it, the 70s and 80s. So, so I am still fond of the old Springsteen stuff too. So my kids make fun of me, but they know every word too.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you're welcome, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining in today with the Rebel Health Coach, Tom Underwood. And be sure to subscribe to the show so you can catch all the episodes. With desire and commitment, you can implement a lifestyle of wellness and fitness. For the support, encouragement, and tools you need to be successful, visit tomunderwood.net.